Okay, welcome to part two of our Module 2 projects. Uh, we have already done the basic structure project where we learned a little bit about modeling tools using extrude, insert edge loop, and a few others on primitive polygons. And now we are going to start working on our lantern project where we really focus on using NURBS and hand drawing curves. Now, you should have watched my two videos before this that were talking about NURBS primitives, about how they are different from polygons and the ways that you can edit them over in the inputs panel here with your start sweep, end sweep, sections, spans, etc. So they're different from polygons in that sense. They're also different because they are made with curves. Now, the cool thing about NURBS is that you can actually hand draw these curves yourself using curve tools and then generate the surface of your desired shape. So that's what we're going to do for this project. We are going to be drawing out different curves and generating the surface of those curves to create a lantern. So I'm going to delete this. And let's start on our lantern project. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to exit out of perspective and you're going to go in front view. And this is how you work with curves. You always want to be in front view versus perspective because it's a little hard to draw out curves in perspective view. So let's stay in front view. I'm not going to be using our primitive NURBS. I am going to be going up to create curve tools, and here are all of the curve tools that we're going to be using. So we're mainly just going to be using the CV curve tool for this project, just so that we can learn a little bit about curves and how you generate NURBS, NURBS objects out of curves. All right, so now first thing you're going to do is you're going to come up to view, and we are going to add an image plane. And an image plane is, to put it simply, is just importing an image of an object into our scene so that we have a reference image to work with. And I'm actually going to drop down Maya. And I have some images right here of some old vintage looking lanterns. And I think I'm going to drag this one into Maya. No, I'm going to drag this one into Maya. And this is going to be my reference image. So you are going to be provided some of these images that you can work with, that you will be able to download them, and then you can load them up into Maya to use as your own reference images. So just to illustrate what you're going to do, I do have my project folder right here. I already created it. If you can see, I already have my initial scene saved inside. And let's take a look at the source images folder. The source images folder is where you're going to put any images that you bring into Maya. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click and drag this lantern image, and I'm going to drop that into the source images of my project folder. If you can see, it's right here. So now when I go back to Maya, I can go to view. I can go down to image plane, import image. And because I've already set up my project folder and saved my initial scene, it's going to open up directly into that project folder. And because we are loading in an image, Maya's going to go search the source images folder, and there is the lantern image that we just put in there. So I'm going to open that. And as you can see, it dropped it in the center of my ground plane. It's just a flattened image. So let's come back here. Let's pull it up and set it on the x-axis right here. I'm going to hit R, and I'm going to scale this up. W to move it, and I'm going to move it up like this. Take a look. Now I'm just going to push this back on the ground plane a bit. Okay, So we have our reference image, and that's definitely going to help us while we draw out the curves of our lantern. So first things first, let's go up to Create, Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool. I'm going to select that. Now, the curve tool works very similarly to the pen tool in Photoshop or Illustrator or any other Adobe software, where you're just dropping down points and it's generating a curve. So to illustrate that, I'm going to zoom in here. We're going to look at the very bottom right here on the Y axis. So that's going to be in the dead center right here. And I'm just going to click and drop my first point. As you can see, there's my first point. Now, as I click, I'm just going to be clicking along and it's going to be adding the points of my curve, and you're going to see it's going to be generating the curve itself. So more points means more control over the shape of the curve. Dropping less points means you have less control. So let's set our next point to right about there. Let me zoom in a little bit more, and I'm going to set my next point. And as you can see, it is building a curve to each point that I set. So I'm just going to keep setting points along the way to right about here. And we're not going to add in all these really fine details. We're going to take this we're going to keep this pretty basic. So I'm actually just going to set one last point and cut right into here, back to the Y axis and drop our last point. So I'm going to drop that right there and I'm going to press enter. So if you can see, we just created a curve. It's a pretty basic curve. And it has, I'm going to go to perspective, it does not have a surface. It's simply a curve. And we are actually just going to generate the surface ourselves. So we're going to go up to surfaces and we're going to click revolve and watch what happens. There we go. So what just happened? Well, I drew the curve and I generated the surface by using the revolve tool. And we now have the base of our lantern. So this is the awesome thing about working with NURBS and curves, is that you have this ability to create and draw out your own curves. And that's not something you can do with polygons. With polygons, you cannot create faces and edges and vertices by yourself and then generate a surface. It doesn't work like that. This only works with curves and NURBS objects. So we generated our base. It's looking pretty good. And I just want to name this base. So don't name the curve. I mean, you can name the curve if you want. So maybe we could do base curve. And we'll just name the generated surface base. Now, the awesome thing is that although we drew it and generated it, we can still edit it a bit. So if I was to go to our editing wheel here by holding right mouse button, I could go to Control Vertex, and you see it's going to show all of the vertices of this NURBS object that we created. And we could actually push, scale, and maybe do some resizing. Maybe widen that a little bit. Maybe push these bottom vertices in, like so. Or we could even just come over to the outliner, select the base curve, and we could just edit it off of the curve itself. Like so. So that's the awesome thing about curves and generating the surfaces, is that you don't even need to edit the surface. You can just edit the curve and that will immediately affect the surface. Okay, I'm going to put this in wireframe just so that we can see everything behind it. Now, let's start adding on the rest of these portions of the lantern. Now I could draw out this middle piece, but because we're keeping it simple, I'm just going to drop in a NURBS primitive, a sphere. So it's going to show up right here. Let's pull this up. And let's scale it. And let's control the vertex a little bit by just selecting this. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I wanted. It's not really doing what I want. That's okay. I think I'm just going to select these ones. There we go. Push these up a little bit like that. Now, this isn't really necessary. This is just me being a bit of a neat freak to make sure that everything looks good. So you don't have to go the extra mile to push and pull like that. You can just leave it a circle in the middle and I will be okay with that. So let's go check it out in perspective like this. So it looks a little wonky, but that's okay. The top part is not going to be visible because we are going to put this next part of the base in there. So I'm going to come back to front view and let's draw out this portion of the base right beneath the glass. So let's go to Create, Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool. And I'm going to start once again at the y-axis and I'm going to drop my first point right here. And now I'm just going to draw out my points following the image. And I'm going to hold shift because holding shift means that it will draw a perfectly straight line. I'm going to come back and I'm just going to click right back at the y-axis and hit enter. So I have my next curve here. It still doesn't have a surface. So let's generate a surface. Let's go up to surfaces and revolve. Check that out in perspective. Okay. So there's our curve and there's the surface that we generated and I like it. Now let's draw out the glass portion of our lantern. So we're going to go back to Create, Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool. And we're going to start back in the y-axis right here. I'm going to drop my first point. I'm going to come out here and set my next one. And now let's start drawing our curve by dropping points following the shape of our image. And remember, the more points you drop, the more you can edit, or not the more that you can edit, but the more precise the shape of the curve will be. I'm going to come right back here. I'm going to drop my last one right on the y-axis, and I'm going to hit enter. So we have this nice rough curve right here. Let's do the same thing. Let's go to surfaces, revolve. Okay, let's check that out in perspective. All right, we have the glass of our lantern right here. Looks good. Now, the last part of this lantern we need to do is this little handle right here. And that's just to control how big or small the flame is, just how much gas is released into the lantern. And we're going to use the curve tool again, but we are going to generate the surface a little differently. So let's go up to Create, Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool. I'm going to start back in the middle on the y-axis, and I'm going to hold shift and drop my second point right here. Let's hit enter. It didn't like that, so let's try that again. Create, CV Curve Tool. Let's go from here. Let's drop a couple of other points. Let's see if that's the issue. And hit enter. There we go. So dropping some more points is what needed to happen. Now my pivot went down to the bottom, so I'm going to go up to Modify, Center Pivot, just to make sure that the pivot is in the middle, and I'm going to lift this a little bit. There we go. Let's take a look. Okay, we have our little curve right here. Now, we're going to generate the surface in a little bit of a different way. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to go up to our NURBS modeling shelf. We don't want to be in surfaces, we want to be in curves. And we're going to create a NURBS circle. So we're just going to drop that right at the bottom here, and we're going to lift this up. Pull it out. And I'm going to hit E to rotate, like so. R to scale it down. To right about there. Let's see. Now I'm trying to make this the length, not of this portion, but of the actual little bar right here. So I'm going to scale this down a little bit more. Let's zoom in a bit. Okay. That looks roughly, and it doesn't need to be perfect, but it looks roughly the width of the bar right here. So instead of revolving the surface like we've been doing for the rest of the lamp, I'm going to select the little circle that we just dropped, which you can see it in perspective mode right there. And then I'm going to hold shift and select the initial line that we dropped right here, the curve right here. Let's go up to surfaces. And instead of the revolve tool, we're going to use the extrude tool. So let's open up, don't just click extrude, let's actually open up the settings right here, which is this little icon. And when you initially open it up, I'm going to reset the settings, it's probably going to look like this. All I want you to do is to click at path and component. And then you're going to hit extrude. All right, so what happened? Well, we generated a surface to this initial curve right here by basing it off of the dimensions of this second curve that we created. So we actually attached these two curves together and generated the surface off of this second one. And if we were to edit this curve, we would be editing the surface of the second curve as well. Or I'm sorry, of the first curve as well. All right, let's make sure it's a little bit closer to the size of the image behind it. Looks good. Now, lastly, we just need the little knob right here. So we're going to do it again, what we just did with these right here. So I'm going to come up to, actually, let's just drop a sphere. And let's pull it out, push it up. And we're going to scale it. We're going to scale it down. And we're going to squash it like this. And let's just position it right around there. So that was a little bit of a cheater way, but you know what? It looks fine to me. And it looks like a nice little knob. Okay, so we have our lamp here. It's a pretty basic lamp. You can see where we drew our curves. We did generate all of our surfaces. And it looks good. Get this out of the way. Lastly, let's make sure that everything is named just for organization's sake. So we did name the base curve and we named the base, but now let's name the sphere. Let's do base ball, or actually let's do base joint. We have curve 1, which is this bottom of the glass. So let's name that glass BTM for bottom curve. We have the surface of that, so let's name that glass BTM. We have the curve of the glass, so let's name that glass curve. The surface of the glass, which we can just name glass. Curve 3, which is the curve that we drew for the little handle. Handle curve. can name this one handle curve 2. The surface of the handle, so we can just name that handle. And then that last flattened sphere that we did for the little knob, which we can name knob. Okay. And there is our NURBS lantern. So once you're at this point, you are finished. All you need to do is save scene as, let's name this finished. And you are going to submit your lantern project folder alongside with your basic structure folder for Module 2 projects.